Life doesn't pause when you're sick. Vaccines against respiratory illnesses can help protect you and give you more playtime with your best friend. Depending on age and health status, vaccinations for flu, COVID-19, RSV, or pneumococcal infection may be recommended. Vaccines can help keep you from having a rough time. Learn more at cveep.org/vaccines-protect. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and CVEEP, fighting infectious respiratory disease.
Welcome. If you're a woman who has a sense that there's more out there for you, you're in the right place. I'm Whitney Baker, host of the Electric Ideas podcast. Somewhere along the line of work and kids, life carried on, but I lost track of my truth. I'm on a reflective journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. Each week, I interview a woman who is lighting her own path and offering others hope. Before our conversation ends, we'll share a reflective question for you to explore. Sometimes all we need is a jolt, a fresh idea, an aha moment that connects us to a sense of possibility. This, my friends, is what I call an electric idea. Welcome back to Electric Ideas. I'm your host, Whitney Baker. So many of you in this community have huge hearts and a deep desire to make positive change in the world. That's one of the many reasons I'm so glad you're here. Today's conversation explores what happens when that drive to make a difference collides with exhaustion. Today, I'm welcoming Nora Wilhelm to the show. She is a systems change advocate, creative facilitator, and the founder of the Well Change Atelier. The organization Nora leads today helps women, changemakers, and the people she calls the givers of this world come back to their essence so they can lead lives and work that feel truly aligned. As you'll learn about in our conversation, a lot of what Nora has built is what she personally truly needed. She was at a point in her career after about a decade of being a leader in change work. She was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30. She was speaking and advocating on global stages, getting invitations all over the world. But she hit a major breaking point. And she says this time of burnout became a major wake-up call. Instead of pushing forward, she chose to pause. She describes her story as both gentle and radical because it's led her to believe that one of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves in the world is to reconnect with our inner rhythm and face the subtle ways we've overextended and exhausted ourselves in service of the greater good. It really calls into question how we can be of service in this world if we are offering ourselves from a depleted place. This conversation truly moved me. I know you're going to have so many good takeaways, so let's get into it. Hi, Nora. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I want to start by sharing a quote that stood out for me. You said, "If we want a regenerative future, we cannot sacrifice ourselves at the altar of change." Can you speak into that?
Yeah, of course. This was a hard one for me to learn. It's probably the highlight or the conclusion that I can speak to now after many, many years of struggling with this and having burnt out, having ended up in the burnout clinic, having been diagnosed with chronic depression while still being high performant, right? So while still being delivering, doing this work on the ground, never stopping. So the problem wasn't necessarily visible for the people around me, but the problem was definitely felt within me once I had enough distance and space and awareness to actually notice in a way how far into the burnout spiral I had fallen. So I have been engaged in change work, in contribution, in trying to find a way to create a better, more just, more sustainable future for all since I was a teenager, right? So that's the context of this, that since I was 15, 16 years old, I've been on this mission to making a difference, making my contribution the best way I possibly can, right? Which evolved as I grew up and as I aged. And I definitely put everything else in my life underneath that on my priority list, and my own needs and my own health at the very bottom of that. And so I was kind of running through life. I don't want to say fully on autopilot because I was very committed and dedicated and also good at the work that I was doing. But everything else took a backseat, and all my, my hobbies, the things that would have made me a more balanced and happy human and a well-resourced human really kind of, had to be put further and further down on the priority list as I was doing all of this work. And when everything kind of came crashing down for me and I had this realization that I could not go on like this any longer, I really had to come face to face with my own pattern that I was in, right? So the pattern that I was stuck in, the cycle I kept repeating over and over again, and the realization that I was not just harming me, right? I was not just harming my own health and creating negative consequences for my happiness or my life. I was also limiting the contribution and the impact that I could bring. I was also potentially harming the people around me, even just by the fact that I showed up as a leader, right? And I modeled self-exploitation in a way, even though I would never have consciously wished this on anyone. I had to take responsibility for the fact that here I was trying to build a regenerative world, a just world. And how I was doing that was by exploiting myself and sacrificing myself. And so that was really a turning point for me when I realized that no, self-care is not selfish. Taking care of my own needs is not being egocentric or ignoring the problems of the world. It's actually essential, not just to keep showing up, to keep doing this work over the years, over time, but also to really bring about the paradigm that I want to see in the world, which is a paradigm of justice, of regeneration, of balance, and of people thriving. So I really had to make that shift within me first.
Self-exploitation is such a powerful world. And just to give even more context, you were named a Forbes 30 under 30. You were speaking on global stages, and you were passionate about really important global issues and matters. So I can see where you were just so dedicated and giving so much energy that it would be really hard to loosen the reins. So when was the moment where you realized that you really made that shift, where you had to unlearn sacrificing yourself in the name of creating positive change, positive ripple in the world? Because that's a big, big shift for people.
Yeah, there are so many ways in which we can kind of trick ourselves or trip ourselves up when we are people who care about the world and care about other people. We care not just about our own lives, we care about our future and maybe what planet the children of our children are going to grow up in. If that's important to you, or also if what's happening today in other parts of the world where people are, exposed more, for example, to the consequences of climate change or ecosystem collapse, or exposed to wars and genocides and all the things that are happening, right? If you care about that, if those things just break your heart whenever you come into contact with them, it can be really difficult to balance this with understanding that, yes, there will be always people who have it worse than you do. It can feel so selfish to kind of take that break and take that bath or take that holiday or pause the work for a while and find the time to resource and regenerate, because it's so front and center that other people have it so much worse, that there is so much pain everywhere, that there is so much to do, right? And so the question of when have I done enough after every, single day, in a month, in a year? When have I done enough? When have I really made my contribution and not just rested in my privilege, for example? So that is really an interrogation that I've seen in my own life, and I've seen in the many change workers I've worked with and supported over the years, that many really struggled with this. And for me, it ended up looking like a cycle around a year where if you would ask me at any point in time, how are you doing right now? I would say something like, yeah, right now it's pretty dense, but in a month it will be better. Or I would say, yeah, I'm a bit stressed right now. It's a lot, but 2 months from now, I'll have hired this new person and it will be better. And I always had this sense of I just need to do this other thing and then it will be better. Just this other thing and then it will be better. And that moment where it would be better, really sustainably better, just never came. And I ended up having a work cycle where I would work so hard and then I would crash around June, have a need to take a break, come back to work. This is the time, everything's different now. Crash by December, take a break, come back to work, everything's different, crash again in June. So this was my yearly cycle. And I think after 3 years of doing this, I could no longer deny to myself that this was a pattern. Because it happens once, you're like, oh, well, happens twice, it's June again. I'm like down on my luck again. Oh, well. The third time around, I was like, no, Nora, we have to be serious here. This is not normal. This is not healthy. And there is a pattern here. And in fact, when I did go to the burnout clinic, one of the first things they taught us is the burnout spiral, right? So this model that starts with overwhelm, which can be work. In my case, it was work, but it could also be becoming a mother or having a second child or a loved one passing away, right? It can be so many things that can bring us to this point of overwhelm. And then the second step, though, is denial. Because if overwhelm happens and I'm aware of it and I can take steps, like I can put, something down, I can put a project on pause, I can ask for more help, I can rally my village, whatever it is that I can do to lessen that overwhelm and deal with it, then maybe I'll not enter the burnout spiral at all. But if I'm in denial about it, then that's when I start going down, right? And I start sacrificing my hobbies and sacrificing my movement, and I start sleeping less, and then I start eating worse. And everything kind of contributes, has this like compounding effect of feeling more and more tired and more down. So for me, it was really being stuck in that denial and having to come to the point where I had to acknowledge that, okay, this is a pattern. There is something wrong here, right? So that was really step one, like realizing that something was wrong, that this was not normal, that this was not right, that this was not a coincidence. That was really, really step one. And then from there, to no one's surprise, I project managed my own burnout. So I then later on met people in the burnout clinic who had been on sick leave for a long time as they had burned out. And then they went to this clinic. And then afterwards, they were still planning on being on sick leave for a while because they knew healing and recovery from burnout takes a long time. And me, I think I got diagnosed in January and I was like, yeah, I think in June I can maybe stop working. So like I was literally told by a psychiatrist to my face, like, you are burnt out, you have chronic depression. And bless her, old me, younger me went, thank you so much for telling me. I'll get back to you in June. Just because I felt like I had so much to complete. My identity was so invested in this organization that I had created. And I was aware that if I just disappeared right now, it would have big consequences, right? For the team, for the funding situation, for the work we were doing. So I literally could not let go, even though I knew I was clinically burnt out. I kept holding on to it all the way to June. I said, okay, then in June, I had to finish my master thesis for the Cambridge degree I was doing at the time. So I submitted the master thesis and then I went to the burnout clinic. And when people told me, yeah, burnout clinic is like 4 to 6 weeks, right, of treatments, of support, of not having any responsibilities, of really being in this kind of self-care mode. And I thought, I'm going to be so energized after these 4 to 6 weeks. Like, I'm going to be on fire when I leave this place, right? Hit the ground running. And then people were like, no, no, no. It actually takes you typically as much time to heal and recover from burnout as it took you to get to that place, which for some people might be a month, right? Crisis hits, you're in the burnout, you may be recovering quickly. For me, it was years. I was then discovering that it was going to take me years of rebuilding a healthier sense of self, rebuilding the boundaries, rebuilding self-worth and self-respect, rebuilding habits and routines and a sense of identity even that wasn't anymore so tied up in exploiting myself.
There's so much to go into, but I first just want to reflect back because I feel like that visual of the overwhelm spiral and then, moving past denial and then you learning in the burnout clinic that if you bypass that, that's kind of where a lot of people land. What does the wise version of yourself do when she hits that overwhelm state now and she doesn't want to fall back on old patterning?
It's definitely a work in progress in the sense that this is also something that I learned that, if you were once addicted to a substance, you will say I'm an alcoholic in remission, for example, right? So I see it a little bit like that too. It's like I had this addiction to working, to creating impacts, to doing these things, and I'm in remission. I don't think I am healed, right? I'm ascended beyond it. I think this may be something that for the rest of my life, maybe my working life, I will have to keep monitoring and being careful with and having a special attention on. So I definitely have my moments where I stumble back into wow, okay, I have too much going on, or I feel so tired, or like I'm not seeing the end of this. So also to like reassure all people listening here that I'm not speaking at all from a place of like I figured this out. On the contrary, it's definitely something that I'm still working on. So that's maybe the first thing I want to say about that. I did discover that there's a bunch of like guardrails or safeguards I can build into my life as a design that help me. So a bunch of things, for example, includes that I have to have twice a year, I plan this longer break of maybe at least 2 weeks. At least once a year, I go on a retreat. Bonus points if it's a silent retreat, like a silent meditation retreat, for example. But it could be a dancing retreat, a yoga retreat, right? It could be a surfing retreat, just something that completely takes me out of my own context, where there's really no, electronics, none of that. And when I don't have, like in the quarters where this break is not happening, I also need like at least a long weekend that just takes me out of that rhythm. And then there are kind of guardrails and safeguards that are more on a weekly and monthly basis, like making sure that there is my dancing, making sure that I do an art-based practice, making sure that I see friends, right? So these are kind of blockers pre-programmed into my calendar that I don't always manage to stick to, but for sure a lot more than if they were just in my mind, right? Like, oh, maybe I'll go dancing someday, or maybe I'll do my yoga someday.
Yeah.
If it's in my calendar, at least, right, I can be more accountable to that. So there are some things that I do that are really preventative. Also, having people around me who hold me accountable to this. So having coaches, people who can really call me out on on my stuff when they notice that I'm falling right back into it. When I do notice, so some of the things that have changed for me is like, this quote by Carl Jung that says something along the lines of, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And other work and quotes along those lines that go into the sense that, like, if we are not aware of what's driving us and we just react, then we never actually get the chance to consciously choose our response, right? So the difference between reacting and responding. And so, for example, now when I get an invitation for something, like I used to get an invitation maybe for a speech or right for something, an opportunity in my work, and I would immediately go into delivery mode. Like not even the moment of like reflection, do I have the capacity? Like, does this work? If I could at all make it, like if I didn't have another speech the same day or whatever, right, I would just immediately go into like pleasing this person that wanted something from me. Yes, I will do it. Yes, I will come. And this was something that I can still feel it arise within me, but I am not anymore driven by it, right? I'm not
Mm,
anymore conscious of it. So now when it rises in me, I can be like, ooh, the stress is rising. Okay, we don't do this anymore. Let's take a breath. And
yeah.
then I can actually consider, do I want to respond to this opportunity and say yes, or do I want to send it to someone else? Do I want to say no, thank you? So that's really been a major shift. And so now when I notice it arising within me, I can act differently. And similarly, when I notice the pattern, I can pick it up sooner. So for example, when I start noticing like, oh, a bit more stressed, I'm a bit more tired, it's a lot right now, then I don't fall into denial anymore.
You have the awareness to catch it earlier. I feel like the intentionality piece is so big. I work on this a lot with my clients and scheduling their self-tending and their creativity, if that's important, and even joy practice into their day-to-day lives. And sometimes it can feel for some people so superfluous in the context of the enormity and the heartbreak and the pain of everything going on in the world. And it can feel silly or selfish. I think that you are very uniquely equipped to talk about this. So, do you have any advice there for how you think about it differently now?
Another quote comes to mind that says, I will not be saved by your exhaustion, nor you by mine. I believe it's by Cole Arthur. I can look it up and also send it to you for the show notes. But the sense that in a way, not only do we need to take care of ourselves to show up, right? And to actually be able to contribute. So in a way that refueling of ourselves, right? That refilling our batteries, filling up our tank, however, whatever metaphor we want to use, is so essential to be able to show up and be our best selves, do our best work, right? So to really bring our contribution, that step before of resourcing ourselves is really necessary Because otherwise, at worst, we come into the spaces where we want to contribute and actually we suck the energy out of the room because we're so depleted, or we add stress to the room that wouldn't be necessary, right? So it can have all sorts of ripple effects that we really don't want, that I don't think anyone wants. So that's really one piece to me, right? That like it is essential. And the other thing is what I had to learn in my case was that my overworking was also driven by guilt. So it was driven by guilt for my level of privilege, guilt for the fact that I didn't do anything to deserve being born in Switzerland into like a okay family and have housing and food and schooling and all of that. That was no deserving of mine. It's just I just happened to be born here. And how unfair that you can just happen to be born somewhere else and have all those things denied to you. And there I would say that we need to find ways to honor our hearts and our sensitivities and how beautiful it is to feel these things so deeply and to have such a sense for justice, right? So, like, I want to honor everyone who feels that way, like, how beautiful. And we don't bring more justice into the world by treating ourselves unjustly. So, again, like, I want to reduce suffering in the world. If that's what I want to do, I'm not going to reduce total suffering in the world by adding suffering of my own. Of course, there's trade-offs, right? There's times where we need to work very hard, and then there's first responders who will literally run into a fire, right? Or who will go to places where they will have to work very hard, or even their safety may be at risk. So this is not equally applicable everywhere. But for all those whose contribution is something more along the lines of a marathon, right? Of showing up daily, day after day, to be a great parent that is gentle with the children, that is supportive, to be a teacher that is constructive, that is kind, that is inspiring, to be a policymaker, right? All of those things, an advocate, an activist, these are things that are marathons, right? That are like really based on this showing up day after day after day. They're not so much spikes. They're something that is grounded in the constant practice. And to be able to do that, we need to have a constant practice of taking care of ourselves as well. And I know it can feel so hard and it can feel like we're being selfish, but I really want to help us reframe that. And for anyone, this is also something I noticed, like anyone who's thinking like, oh, am I being selfish if I do this? In general, if you're asking yourself this question, the answer is no. Because my experience is people who are truly selfish, who have maybe narcissistic tendencies, who just, live off their own privilege and just whatever, want to get rich and not care about anyone else or who they throw under the bus in the process, they will never ask themselves, am I being selfish? Am I being self-centered? Am I a narcissist? Only people who have like moral compass and self-awareness and kind of some type of ethics that they're trying to navigate have even these questions present within them. So yeah, that's what I would say, that we need to reframe self-care as something that we do, yes, for ourselves to be able to show up, but we also do it as part of our contribution to the world.
Hi, it's Whitney hopping in this episode. If you've been feeling stretched thin as a mom, giving to everyone else while your own spark fades, I want to tell you about something new. It's called Back to Bright. It's a personalized 4-week coaching experience for moms who are ready to move from scattered to steady right in the middle of the messy holiday season. You heard me right. Sometimes when we feel the busiest, it's an invitation to slow down the most. I'll work with you to realign your rhythms, eliminate energy leaks, and create everyday anchors that help you feel alive so that you can contribute to your family and your passions from a place of overflow instead of depletion. I don't want you to feel like you're just getting through the days. I want you to feel lit up and alive like you're actually living in your days. I've lovingly carved out time from November through January for a handful of clients that are ready to change their relationship with their everyday. Spaces are limited because I am very careful about my own capacity in the holidays and want to make sure I can show up 100% ready to support the women who are ready to raise their hand. You can find a link in the show notes for more information. If you have any issues or questions there, you're always welcome to connect with me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman and drop me a direct message there. Okay, back to the show. I want to circle back. You mentioned in a few places finding yourself in this place where you're contributing passionately, but almost from a place of ego or even guilt. How can we make sure that we are contributing positively in the world from a place of integrity?
That is so hard. The whole art around self-awareness and getting really to a point where we see our own motives and our own patterns and the things play out in real time. And I would also say, right, that like, don't let any of that prevent you from getting started. Because we can also get to a place where we get so perfectionistic, like, are my intentions completely pure? Have I done all the inner work that I can possibly do before I open my mouth? Have I done my PhD in, self-help books and nonfiction books in order to be legitimate to speak on that? I think we can all like have a little bit more gentleness and ease typically. Again, those of us who have these thoughts mostly, to be like, hey, it's okay, right? We get to show up also as human beings and the way that we are and as works in progress. So that's maybe like one key thing to say. But then I also think it's a very powerful question to ask ourselves, like, where am I coming from with this? And really not coming from in the sense of the country or the place, but where is that energy or that intention or that behavior coming from? What is its root cause or its driver, or sometimes the worldview within which it is steeped, or the self-belief from where this all arises? So, like, where is this coming from? And I used to resist this a lot. I was like, why does it matter? Like, at the end of the day, the behavior matters, right? The results, whether I have treated someone kindly or not, whether I consumed something I didn't need or not, right? That's the behavior that matters. And of course, the behavior does matter. And there's another quote, you'll notice I like my quotes. Bill O'Brien that speaks about the interior condition of the intervener. So the person who does something, what interior condition this person has will affect the situation as well, will determine the outcome, not just the action itself. The energy with which I say something, even if the words are the same, is like you will feel the difference. And same for the impact of our actions. And so in that sense, learning to have that reflection, and sometimes we need a very good journaling session, and that's enough. Sometimes we need a coach, we need a mirror, a mentor, right? A peer, someone who can really hold up a mirror to ourselves and help us kind of reflect this on a deeper level, to be able to dig into that, like, oh, where is this really coming from? What's my interior condition like? And when exploring that, if we discover that there are other drivers next to our good intentions mixed into that, then that will be part of our inner work or inner homework to look into that, right? And see what needs to heal. And typically, if it is driven in these ways by things that we may not want or see as desirable, like guilt, for example, usually it's not just, something that we think, oh, that's a problem for my work, but it's often also detrimental to us, right? Like guilt was directly linked to the way I was treating myself as well. So there's a space here to take responsibility and go on a healing journey with that piece of programming that we've picked up wherever it was.
Wow. Yeah, that's very powerful self-awareness. I want to ask you about a common phenomenon. I think a lot of the women in my community are in the phase of life where they're straddling motherhood and career, and they have good hearts and they want to be of service in the world, even if their maybe profession isn't as front and centered as Changemaker as some of the women you work with. But due to sheer capacity and what we're talking about, like having those seasons where your capacity has changed, I feel like they lose touch with what they're passionate about supporting in terms of what they want to see in the world. And they feel like doing small things almost seems not even worth it. And they kind of just start telling themselves these stories. I'm wondering if you have anything encouraging or hopeful to say about kind of reclaiming contribution in small ways.
Yes, I have a quote.
Oh,
I believe it's by Alicia Walker, and she said, the easiest way to lose our power is to believe we don't have any. So I may be slightly paraphrasing, but that's, I think, the gist of it, is the sense that even if we are not, for example, in a position where we can dedicate our full day to change work, or maybe somebody used to have a career in a foundation or in a charity or in politics or even in a business and trying to change the business towards ethical practices, right? There's so many ways we can contribute. But even if that's not the focus of our days anymore, we have so much power. And we have so much power in, for example, how we vote, in how we consume, what we buy, what we don't buy, in how we treat other people. As a parent, what an incredible power we have to shape the experience of our children. the way we show up in our neighborhoods, the way we show up in the parent council or whatever it's called where you live, right? The way that you get involved in the school system. All of those things are such sources of power. And in fact, to really counteract this quite strongly, something I call out people a lot on is that when they think they want to contribute to change and I want to change systems, I want to change paradigms, very often they go very, very high scale. They think immediately about like the global economy needs to be different. We need to reform the UN, right? Like these incredibly large scale projects. And then what tends to happen is that they spend the next 5 years theorizing about how this could be done. And I'm like, that's interesting potentially, but I am much more interested in how can we change things at a certain depth. And if that means that we have to start very small, very local, but the change is profound, then that for me is more so the way to get to really shifting paradigms. Because we can spend the next 10 years theorizing or 100 years theorizing. But if all of us, imagine all of us, even like say all the mothers listening to this podcast, really shifted paradigms in their homes and then in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their friends groups, in their schools, what a ripple effect. That's a movement. And we inspire each other and we say, what worked in your context? What has worked in my context? And maybe if you transform one school, that shifts to another school, right? Again, much more likely that this works than discussing at the global level, how should the school system look like globally? So that's really to encourage everyone who feels like my world has gotten pretty small and I have this focus, right, on my home, on my family, my community, maybe some work, but less than I used to. There is so much power in that. And in fact, I really, really recommend in many cases that change workers begin at the scale where they can really have influence. And so concretely, what this can look like is like, what books are being read in your family? How representative and diverse are those books, right? And raising children with new narratives and new stories that give them inherent sense of worth, of belonging, of empathy towards the rest of nature, towards people who don't look like them, like how transformative. And how does the family spend time? Are we all like disconnected, hidden away beyond our screens and kind of fragmented in this way and not really connecting? Or are we really cultivating time together, right? Are we exploring nature? Are we connecting with other people? Are we maybe volunteering sometimes as a family? There's so many things that you can do. What are you eating as a family? How much of it is being prepared together and is healthy food that is also good for the planet, right? So the list is endless. So even just within the home, you have so much power to really shift the paradigm that is being lived. In my work, we call this bubbles of sanity or islands of coherence. So that's a term I can offer that like imagine your home or your community as this island of coherence where if everyone else is shouting at each other and there's division and there's violence and there's extraction and exploitation and destruction, what if in that island of coherence where you have influence, another paradigm was lived? And maybe that means organizing a community garden, right? And mobilizing the community. It can mean like organizing in the neighborhood around some political step that needs to be taken, like something needs to be repaired, getting the city council to act. It can mean so many things. But I think the bottom line would really be to not underestimate the power that we have and to honor the fact that a profound shift, a paradigm shift, for example, really shifting the values, shifting the narrative, is going to have so many ripple effects that we cannot possibly control or predict.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a shift even to model something different as a mother in your household.
Exactly. And that's hard, right? So I'm also not here saying the small stuff is easy because the small stuff is actually really, really hard. Like
Right,
showing
right,
up every day, right? For example, supportive partner, that's really hard. Always
right.
eating nourishing food and right and being mindful of maybe not missing the farmer's market and right, like all of that, that's hard. So often we've kind of accepted what is called like kind of under the guise of convenience. We've accepted separation, we've accepted things that are actually extractive and harmful, and that if we wanted to look a little bit deeper, most of us would be like, actually, I don't support that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
most, if they knew how their clothes were made, would be like, oh, that's not what I wanted, right? Like that's not what I support. And still, we are all parts of these systems, whether it's tech, clothing, all the things. So I think it means reducing perhaps some convenience. It means spending a bit more time on being thoughtful about our choices and reflecting on where things come from. And doing that consistently and showing up in this new way and modeling something new is not easy. So kudos to all of us, all of you out there trying, because it's really not easy, but this is the work.
I want to shift gears a little bit because now you are in a place where, through various organizations you've created, you help change makers proactively integrate rhythms into their days that support them being able to share their brightest work. And one of them is tied to art-based practices, which I think is fascinating because most of the people who I meet who are in this go, 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 I've got serious work to do mode would be very hard pressed to do something just for the sake of the process without needing to be like, well, where's this going? What's it for? And I've really pushed back against that in my own life. And I think you have some really interesting perspective as a teacher and an artist and change maker. Can you share that with us?
For sure. So definitely you're spot on. Allowing ourselves to do things for the process, for the experience of it, and not just for the output and the results, and learning to find joy in the process is such a reframe that many, many of us need. We were trained to be so focused on the output, the results, the metric, the KPI, the OKR, right? Like all of those things. And to rewire that to be dedicated to the process and finding a way to even potentially enjoy the process is such a revolutionary thing. And it's something we can learn in art, right? We can learn to be in the process and to not be attached to the outcome. For example, in the Well Change Atelier, this project that you spoke about, one of my dear friends from South Africa, Michelle, she hosts a workshop. It's called Get Grounded. And you work with clay to be really in touch with the element earth and to just play with clay. And it's not to create a cup or a plate or a vase, right? It's really to be playing with this clay and to have no specific outcome in mind and instead really be in the process. And at the end, for example, you could put your piece of clay into the forest and let the rain wash it away. So you could achieve that level of detachment from the outcome that you say, I'm willing to give this back to nature. I don't need to hold on to it. I don't need to put it in the oven and have it forever, like in this specific position, right? And so when we practice this, when we learn that, I think in our own lives, it can be so transformative because this is, I think, a big lie that we were told in capitalism and general the systems that we live in, that product and the output matters so much. Of course it matters, but 90% of our lives are spent in the process. If you think about it, like how often do you have that experience of like, I finished the book versus I wrote the book? The experience of I am writing this book is years, right? So many hours, so many days go into this. And the product of like, I've written this book and maybe, okay, you know, have a sales tour or something, you celebrate a little bit maybe before you hop on to the next book. But how much is that really compared to the whole process of writing the book? And in a similar way, right? Like you bake something, the time of baking versus the time of enjoying what you baked, all the things. Usually our lives are spent in process and much less in the outcome. The outcome is really like a cherry kind of on top of the cake, ideally, right? But the process is so important and is such a big part. And therefore, if we don't focus on the process, if we hate the process, we will never be happy, I don't think. If like I want to be a writer because I would love to have my book published, but I absolutely loathe writing, every single day is a pain, like how much life satisfaction is this going to give me? The dopamine hit of the publication date versus having to literally sit down very diligently every day and write, whether inspiration strikes or not, like it's a craft. I think in doing art, we can learn things that are so applicable to the rest of our lives. Another example is reminding ourselves that we are creators. Artist is like such a sticky term, right? It's been kind of drilled into us that to be an artist, you have to be some Picasso level painter. So we can just leave that aside, but a creator, like someone who there was nothing and now there is something. There was nothing, maybe a piece of paper, a bit of paint, and now there is a painting. And again, we don't have to say it's a good painting, a bad painting. Doesn't matter, right? We didn't do it for the result. We didn't do it for an exhibition. We did it for the process, but I created something. If I write a poem, if I write a chapter in the book that I'm writing, if I do my little clay sculpture, all of that is like, oh, wow, I created something. And society often tells us that we don't have power. Depression and burnout specifically tell us nothing will ever change. Like the voice you hear in
Mhm.
your ear when you're depressed has a lot to do with the sense that like things are bad and I don't see how they could get better. And by going through an art process where from nothing you create something, or from a few ingredients you make something different, just also subconsciously or consciously reminds you of your power, that you are a creator, that you have the ability to create something new. And that also includes changing your life, changing your own circumstance. And potentially, if you're a change worker, can extend to changing the world, right? Changing things in the outer world. But even just that reminder that we have agency, we have power, we are creators, I think is so incredibly powerful.
I love that shift to, creators, because I do feel like artist can be a loaded word for some people. It can shut doors. And I agree. Just like when you can get into that flow of just enjoying the process and remember that energy, for some people, that permission slip to be in that space, to give yourself the safety and space to do that, it can really be regenerative. And you bring that juice into your families, into your change work, or into whatever you feel like is your biggest priorities in the world. It's a practice. So I'm so
Exactly.
aligned with you there. Well, I know that we are coming up on time, but is there anything that's on your heart to share before we close about that interconnected nature of the inner work and outer change that you spoke so eloquently to?
I think I would say that we all have our own channels, right? Some people really gravitate towards, I don't know, things like reading tarot cards, and other people love to look into astrology as a mirror for their own inner work and subconscious. And other people are super called to spending time in nature. For yet other people, it's art, right? Like we can have so many different entry points or access points to our inner work and to becoming more aware of what's going on subconsciously. And my process has been realizing that so often we tell people, oh, do this, do that. Like you have to include this in your morning routine, or you must do yoga, right? So I think you're a little permission slip to trust the practices that have instinctively resonated with you the most. But there is
Mm.
no right way to do this. I think we all share a practice, like it's a commonality that we all have inner work to do, and how that looks in practice and the shape that it takes and the rhythm that it has and the practices that really help us do that can take such different forms. So also there, trust what you gravitated towards. And at the same time, there can also be a curiosity if there was a certain practice that you instinctively rejected immediately. That's also
Mhm.
always interesting, right? Like, oh, where is that coming from again? Like that's resistance. But yeah, I would say just to kind of trust that you're on your own path, on your own journey of building up the toolkit that really works for you. And there can be joy in sharing that with each other. Some people decide to become a coach or an astrologer right there. So there can be people who feel really, really called to commit to a specific path or even discipline or practice. But for many of us, it's going to look like a vastly like diverse toolkit of things that we can rely on at different points in time. And I think also if entering a season, for example, of motherhood that is so drastically different from everything that was before, right? We're really a chapter comes to an end and an identity dies and a new version of the self is born, both things are possible and present and interesting, right? Some things may completely shift, new practices may come in, the routine may look very different. And at the same time, we may find ourselves reclaiming things that maybe, oh, in childhood, I really liked this or I really resonated with that. So yeah, I think the core thing around that would be for all of us to take responsibility for our inner work and our journey and to allow ourselves to let it unfold in whatever shape it wants to take for each of us.
What a beautiful place to end. I couldn't agree more. I think that we get to choose tools and systems that feel great to us, that integrate into where we are, and they might change, right? That gives me this sense of expansiveness and play with the tool versus feeling like I should or oh my God, if I don't do yoga, I'm a life's failure. There's so many ways in, and I'm really glad you shared that.
Yeah, there's a big clue in that, right? Like, when are we alive? When are we following life, which is always cyclical, always changing? And when do we become rigid and strict and try to function like a linear people when we are not, right? We are cyclical beings. So that's a really good pointer. Like when that feeling comes up of like rigidity is always for me an interesting moment to pause and be like, oh, where is that coming from? And how do I get myself back in flow?
So good. Nora, I always like to end my conversations with an opportunity for reflection. So, in this area, we've been talking about of how to contribute in a way that's sustainable. What is one question women could be asking themselves more?
So, what comes to mind is I am really a profound believer in the sense that we all hold a piece of the puzzle. Like we all have a contribution
I'm
that we're
so
here
glad you
to
joined me
make.
today.
And
If you're
so
looking
my
for more,
reflection
feel free to
question
connect with me on
would be,
Instagram at Whitney
am I
Woman.
really
And if you
dedicating
enjoyed the show,
my life
I invite you to
energy
support me by leaving a
to what
review
is truly
or
mine
sharing
to
it with a
bring?
friend.
If I
Hope
can
you have
add
an
a
inspired
sub question
day.
to that, is typically what is yours to bring is also something that will give you energy back. Maybe not always, maybe not every day, but in general, it is something that is both energizing and life giving also for you. So the question I would ask is that, am I really dedicating my life energy in the way that is most aligned, doing what I truly am here to bring and to contribute?
Lovely. Thank you, Nora. I know that my community will want to follow you to learn more and support your work. So, where's the best places to find you?
So you can find me under Nora Wilhelm in Instagram, in LinkedIn, in all the different social platforms. My DMs are always open. I'm really looking forward if there's any follow-up questions or feedback that comes out of this conversation. And if some of you resonated with this topic of finding your unique contribution, then my work over at Paraima may be the right place to go. So to really kind of hone in on what's yours to bring. And if more so the inner work and the whole part around using art-based practices as tools to build resilience and staying connected with ourselves resonated with you, then you can look up the Well Change Atelier.
Wonderful. Nora, this was wonderful having you. Thank you so much for your time and energy.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this beautiful space. It was a pleasure.